We all remember Tony Stark as the charismatic hero who paved the way for the MCU, a man ready to sacrifice himself to save the universe. We now know that Robert Downey Jr. returns to the universe under the guise of Dr. Doom. Imagine a Stark corrupted by his own genius, or an alternative version of himself who chose a completely different path, that of world domination rather than the protection of humanity. This idea may seem crazy, but in the MCU universe, where the multiverse and time travel are now realities, anything is possible. Hi everyone, and welcome to KraziGeek for a new video. Today we will try to understand how Tony becomes Dr. Doom in the MCU through several captivating scenarios, each crazier than the other. And who imagined how Tony Stark could evolve to become Dr. Doom? Prepare your coffee, sit back comfortably. I'm Sam, and you're on KraziGeek. So guys, don't forget to subscribe because we are missing 69 people for the 1,000 subscribers. Let's start with one of the most credible scenarios thanks to the introduction of the multiverse. Imagine that Dr. Doom is actually an alternative version of Tony Stark coming from another universe. In this parallel universe, Stark never found redemption by becoming Iron Man. On the contrary, he succumbed to his pride, his excessive ambition, and his need for absolute control. Rather than sacrificing himself to save humanity, he chooses to dominate. He perfects technology, but also turns to dark magic to increase his power. This alternative Tony Stark would have used his engineering knowledge to build a drone army, fused with mystical elements to make his domination even more incredible. He becomes the absolute ruler of Latveria, a small, fictitious country that he governs with an iron fist. This Stark considers that the only way to guarantee peace is by domination, a total control. But when he discovers the existence of the Avengers and other heroes of the main Earth, he sees them as a threat to his empire and decides to invade their universe. This scenario would not only allow to introduce a version of Stark who already knows the Avengers, but who can also exploit their weaknesses to beat them. Imagine the emotional impact of such a Stark, who not only has Tony's technological intelligence, but who has also acquired formidable mystical powers. It would be a real nightmare for the Avengers and for the fans who have always seen Stark as a hero. This version of the character would be a kind of mix between a genius and a witch tyrant, combining technology and dark magic to establish his supremacy. Let's move on to another scenario just as captivating. What if Tony Stark, after his sacrifice in Endgame, came back to life? Not thanks to futuristic technology this time, but by mystical means, brought back from the dead by an evil wizard or an ancient artifact. Imagine that Tony was found before his death a magical object of incredible power that brings him back to life after Endgame, but with terrifying consequences. In his return, Stark would no longer be the same man. Death would have changed him profoundly. He would have visions of the future, nightmares about the destruction of the universe, and his visions would push him to completely abandon his old identity to adopt a new one, that of Victor Von Doom. This post-mortem Tony Stark, haunted by the fear of destruction and death, would no longer seek to save humanity, but to control it. He would see absolute domination as the only way to guarantee the survival of humanity. In this scenario, Tony, who had become Doom, would be a mix of magic and technology. Imagine Tony Stark, who allies his Iron Man armor with mystical powers capable of manipulating reality while being a technological genius. This would make him one of the most dangerous enemies in the universe, with the ability to control both the physical and mystical world. But what makes this scenario really intriguing is the idea that Stark doesn't think he's a villain. In his mind, he's still the one who wants to save the world, but this time by much darker and more authoritarian means. In another scenario, Victor Von Doom already exists in the MCU. He is the undisputed master of Latveria and one of the Avengers' greatest enemies. However, during an epic battle, Doom is mortally wounded, but before dying, he recognizes in Tony Stark an equivalent spirit to his own. Seeing in Stark someone capable of pursuing his work, Doom transfers his spirit, his knowledge, and maybe even his mystical powers to Tony. Stark, now imbued with Doom's legacy, fights against this new identity. He first tries to destroy everything Doom has built, but little by little, the fusion of their consciousness turns him into something much more dangerous. Tony Stark, torn between his ideals of hero and Doom's evil influence, becomes a supervillain in its own right. It would be a fascinating evolution of the character, where Stark must not only fight against his own inner demons, but also against Doom's legacy. Imagine the moral dilemmas to which Stark would be confronted. On one hand, he wants to continue to protect humanity, but on the other, Doom's influence pushes him to use much more radical, even tyrannical methods. This scenario would offer a complex version of Dr. Doom, a mix of Iron Man and Doom, with heroic ideals but merciless means to achieve his goals. Another possible scenario could take place on a more political ground. Stark, after observing the rise of global global threats in the universe, could come to the conclusion that he must take more radical measures to protect humanity. He could then form a secret alliance with Latveria and its leader, Dr. Doom. It would be a decision matured by necessity, Stark thinking that Doom, with his resources and power, could help him to guarantee peace. But this alliance would go wrong when Doom betrays Stark. In a stroke of a master, Doom would trap Stark in an indestructible armor with mystical abilities that would gradually begin to control Tony's will. Trapped in this armor, Stark would gradually lose his identity until he completely transformed into Victor Von Doom. This scenario would allow to explore Stark's transformation into Doom in a slow and progressive way. Imprisoned in this living armor, he would try to resist Doom's influence, but would eventually give up. It would be a fascinating internal fight where Stark would fight not only against Doom, but also against himself. And now let's move on to what could be the most shocking and overwhelming scenario of all, and my favorite. Imagine that Tony Stark has been Dr. Doom since the beginning. Yes, you heard right. A time paradox could reveal that Stark, in a distant future, overwhelmed by guilt and the loss of his friends, decides to travel into the past and come back to rewrite history. But rather than fixing the mistakes of the past as a hero, he takes a new identity, that of Doom. He goes to Latveria, builds his empire, and begins to manipulate events to try to recreate a perfect world according to his own terms. All this to protect his friends and especially Pepper and her daughter. This future Tony Stark, overwhelmed by guilt, becomes the Doom we know, creating a tragic time cycle where the former hero must now face his future version who has become a tyrant. This conflict between two versions of Tony Stark would be an epic battle, both physical and psychological. Imagine Iron Man, the hero we know and love, forced to fight his own perverted version, a version of himself who chose the path of domination rather than redemption. It would be an incredible emotional and moral shock, not only for the Avengers, but also for us, the fans, who will see Stark fight against himself. As you can see, the return of Robert Downey Jr. as Dr. Doom opens the door to infinite narrative possibilities. Whether through the multiverse, magic, a cursed heritage, or even a temporal paradox, each scenario offers us a different vision of what Tony Stark could have been, and especially of what he could become. So now the question is, which of these scenarios is the most plausible for you? Which one would you like to see happen in the MCU? Is it up to you to give me your opinion now? How do you want to see Tony's return? Let me know in the comment section. And as usual, thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on KraziGeek.